Hello, all. Hi, it's Mikey here. Just letting you know, due to the relative lack of news this week, we decided not to put out a regular show. We've got the Transformers Tuesday coming up, and barely anything to talk about this week, unless you wanted to talk about Hasbro laying off 15% of its employees. So we decided instead to put out the pilot for a new show, which is going to be a semi-regular series. No real schedule, but it will come out when it's ready. And it is a discussion show where I will get various people in to sit down and talk about different kinds of topics in Transformers. Not really news or anything necessarily limited or related to what's going on, just things that pop into my head. For this first one, we have Vangelus in, and we are talking about basically being an adult interacting with a child's medium. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. And I came up with the name finally. It is cheesy, it is Transformers related, but it's part and parcel of it. So please enjoy the first episode of the Squawkbox.
Welcome to Moonbase 2.
Hello and welcome to name to be confirmed at the time of recording. Uh we've got a new show here and a new
I love NTBC. It's one of my favorite shows. I'm so hype.
We're starting well. We so new semi-regular show on the Moonbase, but name is very much patent pending. At one point, I wanted to call it a question you should ask yourself, but I got told that was too long. Weirdly, I got kind of stuck on talk formers for a day or two, but that sounds awful. So if anyone wants to suggest one, talk formers. I nearly called it something else, and then I realized that's not what you call things. But yeah, so we'll see how it plays out. Anyway, so what am I talking about?
A question you should ask yourself. You should ask yourself would have come out with the acronym of ACISE, just in case that sells it any harder.
I still like it. That's the thing. I still like it. So, this is our first go at a proper discussion series. So I've had people on, as you could guess who's on. Chris is here. Say hi, Chris.
Hi! Hello, it's me. Hi, it's me, Chris, Vangelus Internet. I'm on Andy's famous podcast, A Question You Should Ask Yourself, non-committal title to be determined.
Exactly. So we did a really, one of my favorite shows we've ever done actually was the one where we were talking about the collector psychology. Absolutely love that one. If you haven't heard it, it's back there on our Libsyn, on our iTunes. It's back there somewhere. Dig it up. It's a really interesting discussion about why we collect and how it changes as you grow. But yeah, so I was thinking, like, I want to talk about various different things about Transformers that aren't necessarily tied into reviews or news or necessarily current things. They're more topical. I wanted to cover things that are worth discussing, interesting things about the fandom, interesting things about different types of media, different toy lines, engineering, products, Hasbro as a company, marketing, loads and loads of stuff. So I decided that we would have a new show. Like I said, it's going to be semi-regular. We don't really have a schedule yet, so we'll see how it plays out. Where I get someone on to have a chat about a topic. Can be anything really, as long as it's related to Transformers and can run for at least an hour. So if anyone listening to this is interested in contributing suggestions for topics or things they could come on and hold a good conversation for an hour, the moonbase2@gmail.com. That's the email address if you want to contact me. But today, this is in my head because of Earthspark, actually, and a review I listened to on a podcast, which basically boiled it down to, this is not G1. Optimus has a face, Megatron's a good guy, this design isn't a gun. etc.,
That
etc.
explains everything. I've had all these questions on my mind about Earthspark for months, and no one ever said that to me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear this podcast. So, okay, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Finally.
Did you know Optimus had him out?
No, and I thought maybe I was wrong. And I was like, well, I guess I forgot. And I didn't want to tell anyone because I didn't want to seem like I wasn't cool.
Yeah, it's like who would ever say these things on a recorded medium, sounding like a 100-year-old man? But this got me.
Me!
This got me really thinking about the fact that we are, as a unit, a collection of adults, frequently adults of varying ages, between legal adulthood of 18 to 21, depending on your part in the world, to 40s, 50s. I've seen a couple of people in their 60s, who frequently engage with either a toy line or a media that is intended for people much, much younger than us. To the point where we have affected how those media, or how these different forms of media and product has been developed. And I'm very interested to get Chris's take on all of this, because, like, you and I have been doing this a very long time. We've seen multiple versions of the fandom come and go, but this, the adult consuming a child's medium. Basic idea I want to sort of broach, like, why do you think most collectors still do try to consume the current Transformers show, even if it's, as I said, it is aimed at children?
I think there's a couple reasons. I mean, and this is not to be like most of my reasons are non-derogatory. I'll preface with, just in case they get read or heard the wrong way. But like, one I would say is simple habit, mixed with just the culture of being in a fandom is to take in the new thing and have an opinion on it, and it's something that kind of going back to that talk we had and that I've given here and there about collector psychology, is that you kind of are on an autopilot when you start really getting into something for the first time, and usually you're in your 20s or 30s when that's happening, and wherein you're spending a lot of time online into it. In your teens, I always feel like there is a certain element of you're probably at high school, and that's gonna get in the way of being terminally online. Maybe that's not the case anymore, but I kind of just make an assumption there. But I think part of it is like, you feel like you're supposed to. And so obviously, one thing I always try to say with collecting, and that I also say with this stuff, is like, you're never supposed to. And in fact, if you actively don't like it, you should take a break, because it's hate watching is never good for the brain. Even when it's on the back of comedy, eventually it will start to hurt you. But I think that another element of it is that, and this is sort of getting into a wider topic, I think the whole notion of like it's for kids is a lot more of a gradient and a lot more granular now than it once was many a decade ago. Uh, and I think there's a maybe even outside the very likely outside of the realm of my own expertise. There's a whole lot to be said about how like cartoon and animation and toy collecting uh, took on what already existed in the realm of comic book collecting, card collecting, and etc. That basically stuff that was, for the most part, finding its stride in the 80s and 90s, um, stopped being a thing for kids when the people who were there to be kids for it grew up, and it became another thing in parallel to your comic book collecting and your card collecting, your miniatures painting, etc. Uh, and I think that also means that because this is obviously the topic of this thing, it means that thinking about how we take that stuff in does evolve and become a really interesting point of discussion, and I think a really necessary point of discussion at a certain point, again, for like just one's own like happiness and health, enjoying stuff. Because like I'll be frank, sometimes I see critiques of animation or toys where I'm kind of like, it's not that it's less that it's for kids, and it's more like think about the context in which it was created, I guess. It's a very small difference, but I think it really can inform some more salty talking points, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, what do you mean by the context by which it was created?
So, for instance, Earthspark is a kid's cartoon, on the very base level, but I think that statement itself carries preconceptions that are not necessarily existent so much anymore. Obviously, it being a piece of animation primarily for children, it's going to avoid certain topics, certain levels of vulgarity and violence, etc. But I think that nowadays saying it's for kids is more so about what it will avoid doing and less so about what it will not try to do.
Mm.
Um, so, because nowadays, like quote unquote kid shows can still be some of the strongest, most intense storytelling you can see in the span of 12 months,
Mm.
depending on the show. I think there are plenty of examples now of shows that are ostensibly made to be taken in by children that have plenty to offer. I would say Earthspark is actually one of them, but not on quite the same level as my go-to right now, because I just saw it the last year, was Infinity Train. I thought that
Yeah.
was amazing. I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
it was astonishing when I and sadly when I sat down to binge it uh, right after the whole thing of it getting erased from half the internet as a tax write-off, obviously being the crummy
Yeah.
news that raised some awareness. But Infinity Train is a bit of a go-to for me because I think it really is it's a catch-all. I think that late season Steven Universe does hit a lot of that too.
Mm.
But it has the anime thing of being so sprawling that it's hard to just say, "Oh, just go watch all of Steven Universe," because there's like a lot. Even though it's 10-minute episodes, there's a friggin' lot,
Mm-mm.
and all, there are humps and there are hurdles to get through. Infinity Train, I think, is really just you just go pick up season one, watch it. You've watched a complete, solid piece of storytelling that also happens to be um, aimed at children, and that's I guess a long-winded answer to that,
Mm.
that question.
No, it's a I think it's a really valid point because like if I want to think about some of the best storytelling I've seen in recent years, it's frequently in animation. I've started up Star Trek Prodigy again. I only watched one episode before, but it's looking pretty solid so far. Owl House, I think, is kind of the big name.
It's on
That
my
kind of
list. I haven't
yeah.
seen it yet, but it's on my
It's a
list.
it's a very good show. It has something that I always push, which is some very good animation, like some very good fluid animation. Um, but yeah, I think it's a really good point that like what they're trying to do these days is they are pushing more into a realm of complexity. Maybe not maybe that's not the right word, but I don't want to see like adult storytelling, which is not the right thing at all because the storytelling is still structured for the target
Hmm.
age group. But like the Owl House touches on sexuality, it touches on loss, it touches on hate, it touches on sibling conflict, it touches on war, racism, it touches on all of these concepts within the context of the show. Um,
Yeah.
Earthspark very casually deals with the issue of being non-binary by basically just saying accept it, move on. um,
And
and
that's a case where I think that's also just a case of the times being not better now than before, because it's that's a really loaded thing to say, but that kind of topic it has just as much of a place in children's entertainment now as like there was like an episode of Under the Umbrella Tree or something way back when I was a kid where they casually threw in an episode about the topic of anti-Semitism.
mm,
Uh, and mostly because there are going to be kids who face that kind of thing. It's up there. If you're going to ever touch on just the notion of bullying, I think you need to be able to, and I'm not even be able to. You are able to touch on the topics of what someone could be bullied for, and that you inform kids that like that's like they're going to learn that themselves. Some of them, that it's not cool to do that, but you also affirm it in good media that's aimed at them. Um, and I think that just going off something you said, the whole notion of like this is adult, these are adult topics it's touching on, and that doesn't feel like the right thing to say. I think that goes hand in hand with the whole notion of like adult versus kids animation, and
mm,
how we grew up being told there was a schism between the two that like that kind of actually never was there. um it was just always affirmed really heavily that it should be there, and there were constant examples I think throughout the years of shows that pushed against that notion,
mm,
and fed in little things here and there to go like, just because we're making a kid show, we can also still make a good show that has good stories to tell. Um and then going on the back of that, because I've actually heard that as a criticism sometimes that does make me wince a little bit. It's
mm,
like A kid show can do that. However, also a kid show can be simple, and there is a context to consider, which is the kid who just watches an episode once in a while, and whether that just delivers, like, is it a fun story that is part of this production? Um, Going on Earthspark, because that's kind of like the anchor that's topically tied to this. Like a lot of the first half of the first season, like the slice of life episodes, I actually really liked a lot of those, in part because they were just like fun little, lesson of the day episodes I thought were executed quite well and within a really good show production,
Mm.
that had a little bit, they weren't like massive parts of the overarching plot, but they were part of what happened leading up to, a big bombastic mid-season. Is it even a mid-season, or I can't remember anymore. They
It's
ordered like 20 episodes, but
officially half the season. It is It is not officially into season 2. It's going to be season 1 part 2.
okay, so it led into a bombastic mid-season finale. That part's been
Hmm.
Netflix is to blame for some of this. That's been confusing me a little bit because I always can't remember if Earthspark is one of those like we ordered 20 episodes but we're calling it 2 seasons things.
Yeah. What was it? Uh, Tales of the what was it? Oh my god, I really really liked it. It was Wonder Beast, Tales of the Wonder Beast. Someone in the Tales of the Wonder Beast. It was on Netflix,
Okay.
and it's a really good show. I highly highly recommend it, especially if you're into like the visuals, more Steven Universe. Um, it's got like just it's really really fun. It's a Koopa and the land of the Wonder Beast, whatever it was. It's really really good. I really really recommend it to you. Um, just search Wonder Beast, you'll find it. But it had it was ordered for 1 season, and Netflix did the 8 episodes per, and I think 8 episodes released for one day, 6 months apart, is one of the most atrocious ways of releasing a story, especially one that is not intended to be 3 different stories. Like,
Yeah,
and it's
it's messed up because
mm,
in the end of the day, when it's all out, it's like it doesn't really matter now because I can just watch it however I want. But it makes it, that whole thing of wanting to be able to talk about it as it's coming out, being new media in something
mm,
you're a fan of. I remember, and I never finished it, still, and I heard a lot of things up and down. But like Netflix Voltron, I think in part was really messed up by the way that they arbitrarily sliced things apart for seasons that didn't really
yep,
exist,
yep.
and you'd
It
hit
drove
these
me nuts.
yeah, you'd hit these narrative stopgaps where you're like, okay, but I kind of really would just like to. I don't think that the story thought it was stopping there. I would like to know it. Okay, I guess I'll just come back next year.
Yep.
But
I
yeah,
never finished Voltron either, but partly because of the release schedule. If I'm completely honest, it drove me nuts.
we should
Um,
both finish it sometime. We should, it bothers me. I watched so much of it, but also didn't watch at least the last third of it because I got so messed up by the stopgap release. And I'm like whether or not it ended up like good for me. Like I don't like leaving something like that unfinished because I and maybe that's a bad thing to like a sunk time fallacy. But
I
like
don't know.
it just
It's a
bugs
weird
me.
thing. It's a weird thing because like what I liked, what I saw, like
Yeah,
there was a
me
couple of
too.
things. There was a couple of things I didn't like. I didn't really like what was his name, Keith. But I liked the overall storytelling and the acting and it was good.
Yeah,
But it was just like
I never had a reason to check out.
hmm,
It's just
yeah.
I wanted to keep watching and I couldn't. And then when stuff started coming out again, I was like, okay, but like I'm actually really sinking my time into something else right now. Like I have to try to
Yeah.
remember that came out, and then it's been a couple years, and I'm like, damn.
Yeah. It's why I haven't watched Sonic Prime yet. I'm just gonna let it like build up. Um,
Mm.
but so this is really interesting to me because, as you say, like the what the stories are telling, and I like as you highlighted that so many of the stories we grew up on were touching on similar themes. I mean, it
Mm.
was cack-handed as hell, but Captain Bloody Planet did it. But like if you want to talk in
Yeah,
the more mature inverted commas storytelling thing, like we both grew up on Batman and Gargoyles and stuff like that.
yeah. That's why because a lot of people, not a, I'm not gonna say a lot of people. That's a little bit of like a broad strokes filling in the gap statement, but I haven't countered the notion that like Batman the animated series doesn't count as a kids cartoon for X, Y, and Z,
It
and
absolutely
it's like
does, because when they tried to
yeah,
not make it count as a kid cartoon, it failed because they tried to move it to
and
a premium TV slot, and it didn't go well.
Yeah, and also it came out with toys. Like toys
Yeah.
came out behind the show, and also similarly, I've seen it being like, why can't all shows match up to the quality level of Batman the animated series? And it's kind of like well, why can't all films match up to the quality level of Survive Style 5 Plus? Eventually, it's a bit of a cartoonish statement because it's like you're starting to get on the level of I want perfection from everything, and it's like you can't find new things if you also have to hit that every time. So the whole thing about gradients I constantly go on about. But yeah, like we've had going back to the 80s and the 90s, we had every decade had its astonishingly weirdly dark drug episode that you could cite. Um, like those things existed, So the whole notion of like what's a kid's cartoon, what's not. Um, I feel like there's a lot of inadvertently selective memory that can happen in some of those conversations when they get really heated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to where I kind of wish that like this is because where I am is like when I watch something, I kind of watch it under several sets of eyes, and I'm not like trying to, but it's like I'm watching it in the sense of, is this just really friggin' good? And then
Mm.
also if it's a kids cartoon, like sadly this is the way my brain parses it, is this really good kids cartoon stuff that I happen to like? And if I dig into that, I guess it's like, do I still feel like it's engaging? Do I still think there's some good laughs? Do I think there's some good action? And I think in that sense, I care a little bit less about, is there tight storytelling and a really tight overarching story, and more like, is there a good experience in a given episode when I turn it on? And what that experience can be is just like, do I think that there's creativity happening? Do I feel like I'm seeing the passion of the creatives working on this? Because people can be passionate about creating children's media. If you really want me to get Citizen Caney about it, people were really passionate about creating Sesame Street
Mm.
way back. Uh, and that passion can exist even if it's not in the service of something that could be rediscussed under an adult lens. It can also just be passionate creative energy. Um, which is partly why I mean, we went on about Cyberverse, and Cyberverse had it's also just some really cool moments, but I always felt like Cyberverse was at times also just really good Transformers kids show of like
Yeah,
there's
no, it
just
was
a whole
great.
bunch going on. It's very passionate, very
Mm.
bombastic, and it's short, and it's like it's done. And it's not bombastic in like just loud noises, but it's like the creative energy feels like it's flaring and alive in what I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching. Um, and I'll hook into Earthspark a lot since it's kind of it's the new thing. But I feel
Mm.
like that's there in Earthspark as well. And in some cases, just in the production value and the quality of the performances, being given time to breathe, being given direction, and extra takes. I'm assuming.
Mm.
Uh, and just having a general vibe of just it feels like everyone involved is like having a good time and wanting to do cool stories about Transformers, and it made me happy. Like I binged the first 10 episodes. I ended up just watching them all the way through because I never really got bored, and I never really had a reason to stop. And then I
Mm.
got a little bit just fatigued by the time I hit the last two episodes, but then those last two episodes were like a visual feast half the time. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna
Mm.
watch these. So I'll just keep watching them.
It's actually like one of my big draws to animation is the actual visuals so much. Like I don't like the
Mm.
storytelling in the Nickelodeon TMNT show from a couple of years ago, but I think the animation was insane. Um, and
Which one? Which one was
that was the
CG one or the?
one, the animated one, the
Was it
2D
20?
animated.
Yeah, that's Rise
20,
of, right?
yeah, it would have been like 2018.
Yeah, every clip I've seen from that show looks absolutely gorgeous, and I want to
Hmm.
watch it sometime.
Yeah,
And it
some of
sounds
the
like it's bouncing
people.
around.
Here's something that might make sense to you. Some of the people who were the animation team on that are working on Earthspark,
Yes, I caught that. Yeah,
which is probably why we got that Skywarp fight.
I felt a little guilty because I had a moment where I was like, "Oh, I don't need to see Rise now. I got it in my Transformers." But I was like, "That's not fair. I want to go see what they did in Rise as well."
Did you see the animatic for the storyboard?
Yes, I loved it. I
Yeah,
thought it was so cool.
and the
Like
stuff that was cut out
cutout
as well.
2D.
Mm,
Yeah, well, paper cutout. I should say
mm,
paper
mm,
cutout 2D storyboards in a 3D animatic was so cool.
mm, mm, mm. But that fascinated me. All the elements of the fight that got trimmed down, um, for the actual TV show.
Mhm.
But it was such a creative fight. Like that was one of my favorite bits of the whole show. Right from
Oh, it's
just like
gorgeous.
every moment of the action works for that. The only thing that didn't for me was when Skywarp started teleporting and it nearly killed my eyes. But so there really should have been like a photosensitive warning on that one.
I think it's that kind of stuff is a wall that like the most dynamic action animation is always going to run into, and it's such a like the extremes are obvious, but the gradient level below the extremes, my understanding is it's a very hard thing to judge. Because there is like there's photosensitivity where it's like, you know, I don't know if anyone's been watching this. It's like Cyber Kids was a barely seen show with live action show from the 90s that literally opened with just flashing white lights over a black screen. And so like obviously that's photosensitivity going on. But stuff like Skywarp I think does like really ride a line because obviously for me it didn't really hit me that hard, but I could see it like being like right on the cusp for some folks. But yeah, this is just a freaking cool scene too. I didn't think I was gonna. I didn't think I was gonna cite Cyber Kids on anything this year, but there you go.
Oh dear. But it makes me think, like, this part of the conversation makes me think of something I used to say, and I don't think I'd say it these days, which was when someone used to say like, "Oh, why are you taking a kids show so seriously?" Which of course, like, you and I would both say maybe that's not the right attitude to have in the first place. But I would always say, "Listen, I'm an adult. I can only judge it as an adult." And looking back, I think it's more accurate to say I can only judge it from my own perspective, not the.
I would, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, I would agree. I think it's a growing step that everyone kind of has to go through at a certain point too when you're into these sort of shows and media, because it's not like bad to have had a point where you're like, well, I can only judge it as an adult, because at a certain point you become, I mean, adulthood itself is already this like really weird thing to define anyway outside of the legal system. But like I think it's a necessary growth step everyone goes through where you go like, okay, like I liked stuff as a kid for this reason, but I'm older now. I gotta have better reasons to like it, and then ideally hitting a bit of an epiphany of like my better reasons don't necessarily have to run concurrent to some of the more shallow reasons why I enjoyed stuff.
Yeah. But so that all spins off into like that review I heard, and I won't be saying names or anything like that. That's not fair to anyone. But they took the stance of it felt like they were viewing it. They were viewing it from their own perspective, and they were defining that perspective as I was an adult engaging with media, not I was an adult engaging with a cartoon. I was not an adult engaging with something primarily aimed at children. I was an adult engaging with media. I will review this like I was reviewing Breaking Bad. And they hated it. They said like, "Oh my god, it's so bad." And someone tried to make the argument it was a message show, and it's just like, no, that's not a message show. And I would say pretty strongly that the Slice of Life is very much a message show. But what struck me in the middle of
I
it
mean,
all,
I'm not sure. I don't know the exact definition, but okay, good.
no. What struck me in the middle of it was when they started complaining about Prime having a mouth and said we need to move away from this. I'm tired of it. I'm so sick of it. He doesn't need a mouth. Everything else, and then I just sort of paused and I sort of thought, not the first Prime to show a mouth, but the first Prime where a mouth was just a regular thing was not the one everyone thinks it was.
Correct. I mean, it was. I mean, in my mind, the first one I think of is from 10 years ago. No, 12 years ago.
Yeah, but
Uh,
the first one well, actually, there's, if you want to play two of them, if you want to go be really pedantic and say Optimus Prime, it's 2005 with Galaxy Force, who had him out 90% of the time he was on screen. And then if you want to go even further back and just let's be a little bit honest, Optimus Primal, who had him out way more than 90%, only ever used that mask thing, what, twice? In the whole show.
yeah.
Your character with a long face and a human mouth has been around for longer than some people in the fandom have been alive. But we're still responding to it like it has just cropped up in the movies there last week, and we don't like it. And
I mean, I was dropping that gag a little bit about was it with Beast stuff being in the next live action movie, and that
Mm.
that's live action movie talk being where you can find some of the deepest set brain rot that you can find. I was saying like, oh, I'm so hyped to hear people talking about like I don't know how I feel about this new Beast thing being in these in my Transformers movies, and going like, yeah, that new Beast thing was actually from the previous century. It is the year 2023. I don't know if you noticed, you've aged 2 decades probably since. I mean, it's what I will say. To be fair, it's low hanging fruit to kind of like just drop math on people who are thinking with their nostalgia faces
Mm.
versus their brains. But it is also a really common thing where eventually you hit these like moments where you're like, oh my man, you got an anchor stuck in your brain somewhere where you still think the year's 2010. You, you still think that Beast Wars is new. You're still happy that they didn't make more of that Armada show that just came out.
Yeah.
uh, it's been such a long time. You gotta, because yeah, like if Prime having a mouth putting someone off, it's like that's completely valid. It's just like it's not really a discussable point at a certain after a minute, because it's like
Yeah.
you just don't like how it looks. That's fine. There's
Yeah.
not a lot else though.
And like all of my favorite primes have had him out except for IDW, and then he had him out afterwards. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, it just got me thinking on this topic. It's just like we're
yeah.
grown ass men, women, and non-binaries and whatever, but we're all you know in our at an age where people tell us to maybe be a bit more sensible, and we're still getting that upset over a cartoon that like we are a target audience, we are not the target audience. And I see this with the toy lines as well. We all do it. I think we discuss these as a product aimed at us. Now, we're all very grateful to the current batch of Hasbro who really go out to the way to engage with us and everything else. But, we know that we make up what, between 10 and 25% of the market? Which is
There's that whole article recently
hmm,
where it's like we might be up to the 20% now as
yeah.
let me say the cuss word kidults.
Ugh.
Uh
But
sorry.
that is as much a factor of the fact, in my opinion, the market is shrinking as it is a factor of
Yeah.
what's else. Oh my God, we're so important. But we never talk about these things from the perspective of this is a kid's product that we're engaging with. Like when people are reviewing toy, like the amount of like casual scoring you'll have towards the Warrior Deluxe class from in for the whatever show is airing at the moment. Um, and I just like what's interests me about this is I do it as well. I do it. I'm not saying I'm innocent in this at all. But do you think that most people maybe just because they don't think about it, or because they maybe want to just try and feel less inverted commas weird about what they do as a hobby or something like that, either actively or subconsciously disconnect the franchise from children once they become a part of it? Like, this is a children's franchise until I've become engaged with it. Ergo, its toys must meet my requirements. Its media must meet my requirements. What do you think?
I would say that's definitely something that to varying degrees happens unconsciously. Going back to an earlier thing I said, like again, that whole thing where you change from being a kid to a young adult to an adult, and that the last two parts of that really are a difficult gradient to define as far as your own mental development. And I'm using a lot of phrases that are like they're the words I'm picking out here. I am not an expert, and I'm probably misusing some of this terminology. So yeah, roll with me here a little bit. Uh, but I think that does create these scenarios of like defensiveness and wanting to have an adult outlook on things. I mean that is at the end of the day, all of the stuff I say about collector psychology is in part coming from that same energy of like wanting to think a little bit more and dissect a little bit more of the stuff I love. In my case, I like to think I'm doing it, constructively
Hmm.
and to a positive end that isn't really like it's less about scrutiny and criticism and more just about like understanding one's own enjoyment of something for one's own betterment. But it is very common to see, like you said, people taking a kid show and just tearing it apart as though it were a primetime HBO serialized thing like Breaking Bad or something. which I don't think was on HBO now that I'm thinking about it, but it's a go-to word. Again, roll with me here. It's more about the vibe than the facts. But yeah, and it's something where I often want to sit people down if it's happening to go like, because it's difficult, because it's very easy to take it as the other extreme, where someone says, I want to dissect this piece of media that is aimed at me as a fan of it and I want to enjoy. And you can't just, I think you can't just go like, hey, calm down, it's just a kid show, because that is diminishing both to the person you're talking to and to the production itself. Because the whole notion of who it's for, as I think you've alluded to right now, it's really gelatinous. Like, stuff made for kids is demonstrably aware of its older audience as well. In media, in products like toys and whatnot, and it's trying to ride this very fine and wobbly line made of Jello, which is compounded with the probably slightly frightening fact that markets are shrinking that used to be a set thing 30 years ago. And that's a lot of that's on the corporate culture not wanting to admit that time passes, I guess. That's how I always view it. But I always think to myself, like, dissect the thing. This thing about context again. Dissect the thing with an audible or visible knowledge of the context with which the thing was created. So it's like, dissect the thing, but then like at a certain point, you gotta dial it back. Like if you're saying like that this slice of life episode did not contribute meaningfully to the overall narrative of the season, it's kind of like it didn't. And if that bugs you, that's fine. If that's a deep, we're going to talk 20 minutes long criticism about that 20-minute, Earthspark episodes, were they? I already forgot.
They were 20.
Minutes?
They were 20.
Okay, yeah. So because it's varying now, right? So if you want to actually discuss this 20-minute slice of the season in depth for like 20 or more minutes on the back of it did not satisfy its slot in the narrative overall, and a more balanced story like Breaking Bad would done this way, it's kind of like, okay, but the context of this show does take into account the notion that like a bulk of its season 1 episodes may be seen in a vacuum, and needs a harsh word, but like they sort of need to accommodate existing in a vacuum for a viewer. And I think I've noticed a pattern that this is more so a season 1 thing than a season 2 onwards type of thing for animated shows, where your opening season has a little bit more slice of life or a little bit more like one-off stories. I really wish, by the way, and this is a tangent for a second, that the notion of the one-off story episode wasn't seen as an inherent negative so often as well.
Miss it,
I think that
in all honesty.
Yeah, it's been a bleed over of I think taking a lot of productions as having to stand up to serialize stuff like Breaking Bad. Which, when Breaking Bad has had Breaking Bad's just an easy go-to right now. It's also on my mind. I watched some clips the other day, but like it was very serialized. It also had a couple one-offs here and there, like episodes you could just watch, like the Fly episode. I think you could, for the most part, watch on its own. You'd be missing some stuff, but anyway, I'll get myself back on track. It's all part of how I feel that there's multiple sets of eyes as you get older. That's kind of the thing that you develop when you get older. It's not so much more mature taste as it is multiple eyes when you're watching things that are meant to accommodate younger viewers. Watch it through the eyes of yourself, watch it through the eyes of that younger viewer and who it was made for, and also watch it through the eyes of the person working on it, who probably just loves this stuff and is an adult. Adults make cartoons, kind of full stop. When it comes to, aired on television and streaming cartoons, for the most part, they are made by teams of adults who probably have passions of their own that they're trying to get out through these shows. And when you look for those as well, I think it really helps. I'll use the word explain some of those pits and valleys that you may run into when you're trying to look at it, with an adult critical eye. I have one other big kind of tangent to go off, but I've been talking a lot. But
No, go ahead. Go
I also I think
no hesitation. No hesitation.
I think enthusiast adults who are very online have also had, and no matter how distant you are from this stuff, I think that there has been a little bit of damage done to the notion of media criticism by a lot of popular critics who do criticism for entertainment over the years. and it's not pointedly, and because I'm not really leveling blame here so much as just like I just feel this has been a pattern for a while,
Mm.
um, in that there are a lot of critiques that I think are born on the back of popular critics who yell about stuff in various spaces, be they angry or nostalgic or looking for sinful content in your film media, and it creates mindsets of what criticism is that sometimes to me are just nonsensical.
Mm.
Like in an animated piece that is meant to accommodate a child audience, sometimes I feel like looking for plot holes. You do it for fun, but like if you look for plot holes and you find them and you get mad about it, to a certain degree, I'm always like, okay, but was it fun to watch though? Like, does was it fun to watch? Because there's gonna be like plot holes can ruin a thing even for a kid. But like sometimes it's like plot holes or does this contribute to the narrative? It's like is that's fine, but like did that actually negatively affect this as a contained episodic piece?
Mm. Mm.
And did it negate its ability to entertain at all? Also, I think a lot of people don't know what a plot hole is, but that's another thing. That's another thing. But
Yeah, there's some truth in that. But no, it's yeah, no, it's a that's a very good example, to be honest. The other question: have you ever found just we've mentioned this kind of psychology. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you think, oh wait, I'm doing this?
oh, constantly, all the time. That's why I think there's no shame in doing
Hmm.
it. It's just that there's shame in trying to pretend you're not when you are. I guess is how I'd put it. Like going to you for example, like just being able to say out loud, once upon a time I would have said this statement, and I feel I wouldn't anymore. I would instead say this. Is like that's that. There you go. You did it. You had the you had a moment a while back. You think about it now and you think, yeah, I wouldn't say that. I'd say this instead. I don't think I'd say that thing. It's like there you go. Like back when Prime was airing, like I was part of the crowd who was getting in on it a bit of going like, oh, they're just doing fetch quests for MacGuffins over and over again. And then like as years went on, I thought about it and I was like, there's criticism to make about that stuff causing like a stop and start in like a very loud narrative thrush that's going on, but also as a kid's show, it's fine to fetch quest at the end of the day. Like I feel like that very notion itself is not actually a damning thing. Like they're looking for artifacts. It's like, okay, but like they got to have something to do, and like they're having cartoon episodes where that just is the backbone, and that's what's making them go from point A to point B. And they're like that's one of the things where I would probably nowadays be less concerned about that and just more concerned about like how do these episodes feel
Hmm.
from piece to piece. I think that Prime is also an example of something that was really like what you could call a tweener show of like trying to court a whole lot of audiences at the same time very loudly.
Hmm.
Um, which again, it's like it's not bad to have had moments here and there, whether or not you even agree with me when I say it. But like to have had moments where you're kind of getting a little bit too heavy on ripping into a kid show, it's like that's fine. Like it's just like it'll be something that happens now and then. It's more so, do you recognize you did it at a certain point, and do you go like, yeah, I could have backed off. That was a bit silly. This is still whatever. Um, Personal growth comes very much, I think, from like recognition and just going like, yeah, and shrugging. Recognition and shrugging is what I'll call it. I'm like, yeah, you got me. I mean, I go on and on about instructions, right? It is. I will say 60% mostly because it irritates me. uh, Less so than the effect it has on kids. I think for a lot of kids, it doesn't really matter now with the way that Transformers are made. Like there is a level of intuitiveness in a lot of Transformers that like you can figure it out, or if you're really young, or even if you're an adult, you might just not care because you might be happy enough with the thing. Uh, I only really slam a fist on the table about it with like the high end stuff where it's expensive and hard to replace. That's where I think it becomes more valid a yelling point.
Hmm.
But I've gone on about instructions a lot. I think that what's another example? Like, um, it's really easy as an adult collector to get really hung up on certain points of articulation. Uh, and I'll say very certain points of articulation that may or may not be there. Um, and I mean, I was yelling about articulation when I was a teenager, now and then as well, but I think that was mostly because young adults on the same message boards were doing it, and I
Hmm.
wanted to fit in and be cool with the adults. uh, but yeah, I would never in my entire life say I've never done that, because like I absolutely have. I've been recorded doing it plenty of times.
We have the tapes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like I said, like relatively recently, I think this is an interesting one actually. Now I'm saying it, Mike. I think one of the things that probably drives this, it's I'm justifying it because I'm an adult perspective. Whether it's complaining about the toys and instruction or anything else, has to do a lot with where you are in life in general.
Yeah.
Because I like up until relatively recently, I was up and down. I had different things going on, but it struck me. I think it was actually Legacy that made me realize this. Like when Skyquake came out, or got leaked. Sorry, and I'd been pretty negative on the Prime figures, and I thought he looked good, and I thinking like, oh, he's going for a different thing. Like he's actually a hybrid aesthetic. Okay, and then I realized like I am a 30-something-year-old man who has put an enormous amount of energy into complaining about these toys not looking like the cartoon characters, especially when he put enormous amount of energy beforehand when saying the other toys look too much like the cartoon characters. And it was a weird realization for me, and I realized that a lot of that was that I needed something to direct my own energies towards, and that was where I was doing it. Now, obviously, I can't speak for anyone else's circumstances, but I do think like where you are in your real life, it is almost like very easy to see reflected in how you engage with this kind of media. Um, I'm on a message board or a Discord for a day straight talking about whether or not Earthspark was right to have Megatron as a good guy. Like, because I can. I have the energy to do it. I've got the time to do it. I've got the motivation. But it also means like eventually I will stop. It will stop being about what I'm talking about. It will just be about like what I want it to be. I actually think another good example of this is just the Western Toku fandom, specifically Sentai and Rider, because I've been watching Rider for 12 years now. Yeah, 12 years. No, just over 12 years because I started in the middle of Double, and we're both very old. But I've never really got the feeling that a lot of people it really hits people that this is being made for kids. Part
Oh,
of that is
100%.
because we're so disconnected geographically, and what Japanese storytelling is so different, and they push the boundaries of what we would consider like inverted commas the kid show. But I've seen people get really embarrassed when you bring it up, and like I in some ways I do it because the shows deserve it, because when they're good, they're phenomenal storytelling. But I always, it's my full analytical brain on when I'm watching Rider. I'm doing it with Geats now constantly, which I don't know if you've seen, but is very much like it's written by the guy who did Xaid, and it's N01. So, and
I'm very behind on Rider, I should say, for context.
yeah, you skipped Xaid altogether, didn't you?
Oh, no, I watched Exade.
Oh,
I've seen a lot of it still. The series I
not
haven't
Xaid,
seen
not
in full.
Xaid. Revice. Sorry, you skipped Revice is what I want
Yeah,
to say.
yeah, yeah. Basically, I didn't finish Saber yet, and I want to, because I actually I have been enjoying it. It's just it ran into the Voltron thing where I ran out of episodes,
Mm.
and then when the rest of them were out, I was busy, and so I haven't gone back to finish it. But then it meant that it was really easy for me to. Well, Revice also had a whole other thing that made me kind of just ignore it for a few months.
Yes,
And then
yeah, there was a fair bit of that, and then another
there's
thing
there's
kind of
a whole
supposedly came
thing.
out at the end, but from what I can see, a lot of that is
Yeah,
internet detective work, which is difficult to plug down, if I'm honest. But
basically it made Revice like a little stinky to me when it came out, and I was like, I'm not going to spend energy telling people why I'm not watching it. I'm just like, I'll check it out later. So I haven't gone back to that one yet. I have also literally had two friends tell me don't bother, but I never like that when people say that about Rider series, because usually it's on the back of like the overall payoff when I watched it weekly for a year just wasn't that great, and I'm like, okay, It's gonna be different when I watch it a la carte though, because like I'll not have the sunk time of like a year weekly.
Yeah.
But then yeah, with Geats, I've heard nothing but good stuff, and I think it looks really cool. I've just not had the time to actually like set up to watch a new series
Mm.
in my brain. Um, but I don't want to cut all the way in. But like the actually, I think that Rider is another really big one where I have at times wanted to grab someone by the shoulders and go like, okay, but also, like I think with Rider it's a lot even more gelatinous and gray as to like what its precise narrative intent is. But sometimes I'm kind of like, even if it's like C plus adult grading, it's still pretty darn good for a Common Rider show,
Mm.
in my opinion. Um, like just for what it is tasked with doing, and the storytelling, not even the storytelling, but also the production schedule it is
Mm.
locked into. I'm very forgiving about a lot of specific things with tokusatsu shows, and I mean I've gone on about it before with tokusatsu because it's live action. For me, it's a lot more about the energy and the eagerness, and whether it feels like I'm 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 party to someone's creative joy, I guess is how I'd put it. Um, which is a very weird thing to try to quantify. It's sort of like you either detect it or you don't. But uh, yeah, I would also say that like Western tokusatsu fandom has a huge identity crisis about how they regard their media. Like there is too much talk about ratings in a fandom in that fandom.
Hmm.
There is too much talk about ratings and yearly like gains on the back of a franchise.
Yeah, I've heard
Uh,
a lot of that, especially every it was Sentai, I think, in the last couple of years that have been really of it because every single time it's that, listen, the ratings are down, the blah blah are down. Like, I think this is going to be the last one. I think this is going to be the one that's cancelled. Don Brothers, I remember before Don Brothers started, it was rife. They like someone gave an interview, and the English translator translated it as like, "Oh, we're the last Sentai team," and actually, what he said was like, "We're the latest Sentai team." And it just set off the whole thing of just like, well, their numbers are down. Their numbers are down.
yeah, I mean, what I have caught is that pro wrestling fans fall into this pattern as well, where it's like, it's one thing to have fun discussing the ratings because I think it's easy to sound like I think that's just stupid. Full stop. It's fine. It's if it's of interest, it's of interest. It's just that I find like I think there are a lot of people who feel they're supposed to have an opinion on that, or that like that is a determining factor in their enjoyment of the overall thing, and I'm kind of like, it's not though. Like if you think it is, I don't know what to tell you, but like whether or not this show was good for the overall ratings history of the franchise of Super Sentai, I don't understand how that remotely relates to one's enjoyment of the show. Or the aforementioned toy lines. It's kind of like it's a trivia point, and that's it. Because also, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, a lot of Western fans have zero input on those numbers.
Mm.
So it's also why I find like the importance behind them to be so odd and at times frustrating to witness, because it's like, or when someone goes like, wants to go on at length. Like I don't go on at length when I don't watch a Rider show or something, or a Sentai show. I don't really feel like it's that important. Like if someone asks, I'll just be like, yeah, I haven't checked it out yet. I don't know if I will. But
Mm.
like sometimes people, I find you'll catch people here and there on this. Usually it's on Twitter, uh, kind of grandstanding about how I don't think I'm gonna watch this year's show. It does not impress me, and it's kind of like it doesn't matter though, because like you're pirating it, so it,
Mm.
it doesn't matter. And even with Ultraman, it's kind of like it only barely matters that you gave it a YouTube click. Like it, it's not like TV ratings. I mean, even TV ratings barely exist anymore. So
Oh yeah, like
with with
I was
with
reading one thing,
Tokusatsu,
and like HBO Max was when was it, when Godzilla vs Kong came out? Like I was curious, and it just like, yeah, we don't really do watches or anything anymore, or ratings, because it's like we judge it by how many subscriptions we gain on that day.
yeah,
So you could watch the movie a
because that
million times, but if you didn't subscribe a million times, they're not going to record it.
yeah, it's like because that's actionable. That's
Mm.
that's a line on the graph. And this, I think this is, before I get way off in the trenches, like this
Mm.
this does relate, because I think it is also a case of how an adult fan of something can start to attribute I would just in this case call it the wrong priorities to justify to themselves why they like the thing.
Mm.
And also, I've said this before, I said this earlier, but like a lot of this stuff is mostly serves to make the fan in question more frustrated most of the time. Uh, and I think that there is a weird psychological thing of being an adult fan means being more critical, and that being more critical means being less impressed, and
Mm.
that it just creates a negative mental environment where the thing that is supposed to be fun for you slowly and surely becomes less fun and more obligation, and that's obligation was one of my operating words with toy collecting as well, of like feeling like you're obliged to keep up with new stuff as opposed to
I
wanting to.
recently encountered that again, listening to another podcast, different one this time, where someone said they were going to they hated the train bot, the masterpiece train bot they got. They absolutely hated it. And someone made a joke like, "Well, now you're only in it for $600," and he was just like, "Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to get them all, but I really don't want to." And I was just like, that really made me pause.
Uh, yeah, because you know what, I actually have great empathy for that notion because there is a sunk cost fallacy. Because if I'm assuming that by that phrasing it means they had more than one.
Uh, no, they've still got 5 to buy.
Okay, so just okay. Well, in that case, it'd be like just sell it. You can sell one,
Mm.
because if you were like 3 deep and then realizing like, oh, I don't like this, like that's 3 sales of masterpiece toys you're trying to do now, which can be stressful because
Mm.
masterpiece toys being more complex and by virtue a little bit more fragile, selling them can be really irritating, is my understanding.
Mm.
Because people want 5 million photos before they want to buy it off you. Like and then they'll see a light glint on the side of a ball socket. Go, is that ball socket joint stressed? Is that cracking? And it's like, oh crap. Sorry, no, that's just I use bright lamps. But yeah, like this. I mean, you see this in third-party combiner stuff all the time too. It's like, well, I'm in on this one. Well, no, I chose to go in on that one, and I always kind of go like, you could change mine though, dog. Like, no one's forcing you to do anything. Uh, but I also completely understand the feeling that you have to, right? Because especially with third-party ones. But I think I would say the MPG trains are the same psychology as any third-party combiner, just by virtue of how long they're taking to come out and how expensive they are. So by getting in on them, you've also kind of joined a micro community, right?
Mm.
Of everyone else who's going through purchasing them. And I think that sense of belonging, whether or not you want it to, can become a hook that sticks in your head. Like obviously also there's just this, the new toy smell hook, right? And that,
Mm.
hey, what if I stick it out in the combined form is actually sick and I love it, right? That's always going to be a potential thing.
Mm.
Um, in my case, that's why I've been banging on a table so much on Twitter about show me how the combination interlocks work, because I'm now at a point where I know what I like in toys, and so for a big expensive combining transformer, I want to know I can play around with the combined form.
Mm.
Um, and so with MPG Raiden, what I've run into is I don't know how he works when he's Raiden. I don't know how he combines. So I'm like I don't know if I like him because the hips come out last. So like I'm only very soon going to find out how the shoulders clip in, right? Like and I don't even know how that works. I can't remember if we're there yet on him. And the Moon Studios one,
Don't
the
know.
upside of it coming out so fast
Mm.
is I know how it works, and thus I know I don't want it because I think the shoulder connections are horrible on that one. Um, so it's like, yeah, I I feel for that notion, but you are right. That is a totally relevant thing to bring up. The whole thing of like, oh, well, I've got to now that I'm in it. Like with Earthspark, right? With the toy line for Earthspark or Cyberverse, when you
Mm.
tell people like, you should look in a toy line if you like the look of a character, just find out if they have a good figure, and you'll hit the thing of like, okay, but I don't want to because like all the other ones might be crappy, or like I don't want to have to buy that line, and you go like, you don't have to buy that line though. Like if you enjoyed the episode with the Dinobots, okay, yeah, you're screwed because you have to go to like 3 different size classes. So sorry, Mikey, but
With
uh,
varying degrees of quality, I can tell you from my own hunting.
yeah. But like if you really liked if I don't know, like I'm trying to grab a deluxe off the top of my head now because it's a bunch of them.
Prowl. If you
Um,
really liked Prowl,
if you liked Prowl's
key
2.5
character
minutes of
Prowl.
screen time, then you could just buy Prowl. I would say like the Shockwave is an example, right? Like if you liked the moments that Shockwave had, and you want a deluxe of him to have like a toy of it, pick him up. You don't have to buy the rest of them. Like and I'm not saying that like obviously there is a psychology about wanting to collect a whole set, and if you want that to be one of your drives also to prevent you from buying things, then like don't let me talk you into buying something, right? But that sense of obligation being out of your control is something that always makes me go like, man, though it's
Mm.
not out of your control. Like, and that's why I always rail on hate watching, because I'm like, do it if it's fun, right? But like sometimes people do it and they're not having fun and they're really angry that they're doing it, and I'm kind of like, then don't. Like, you don't have to hate watch things. And in fact, if you're hate watching things and then telling me you don't have time to watch good things, then I get actually mad and want to shake you.
Well, I will hopefully, I watched one episode of Velma. And I watched it because I watched a trailer and it didn't look that terrible in honesty. And now I'm not
Oh yeah,
watching any
yeah.
more episodes of Velma. But
I
I'm not
I
hate
thought
watching
I
it.
thought the Harley Quinn thing.
Hmm.
I thought the Harley Quinn thing was going to happen, where it's like, yeah, the trailer looks bad, the animation looks pretty cool, so maybe it'll turn out fine with a crappy trailer. And then like, I only know about 2 episodes worth of the show, but I looked into it and I was like, this doesn't seem like it's a Harley Quinn scenario. This seems like it's
Not
just a really,
funny.
it seems like it's a mean show.
Yeah, that
Like,
was that was my takeaway. My takeaway is just like it's kind of mean to everyone. It's mean if you liked Scooby Doo. It's mean if you didn't like Scooby Doo. It's mean if you are an adult. It's mean if you're a teenager. It's mean if you're a woman. It means if you're a man. It means if you're straight. It mean if you're gay. It's just kind of mean spirited. Like there's a
it's just like
weird
a
clip
really,
going around from a later episode of like Freddy can't cut food, and it's this 5 minute scene of him trying to cut food, and I was just like, this is just mean.
it's like, well, and what I'll say about that scene is that felt like, and I am divorcing this from very recent current events, but that really felt like someone who was like, I'm gonna go with the Justin Roiland brand of comedy, yeah. And it's kind of like, it's like, okay, well, that comedy actually is very hard. Like, Justin Roiland can't make that comedy work like a third of the time. But then also B, unfortunately it's the Justin Roiland brand of comedy, and that's going to come with all kinds of connotation now. So maybe this just
um,
serves as a lesson, right? Like, hey,
yeah,
these kind of
yeah.
jokes, like that joke to
Mm,
me. There's a version of that joke that's funny to me. It wasn't that clip, and I don't think that the version of the joke that's funny would actually work in a narrative cartoon. I think it's a podcast joke about
mm,
yourself.
yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah, it was weird. It was very strange. But that actually leads me onto something I definitely wanted to cover. As you know, we are also people who partake of adult animation, inverted commas. I don't partake of a ton of it because I'm so sick of the gross out humor in most of it. But we have very occasionally have a piece of Transformers media aimed at the adult. I'm not including the movies in this because I don't think the movies are aimed at quote unquote the adult. They're aimed at quote unquote the teenager. And I think that's
They're
something
weird.
again. Yeah, they're strange and hormonal and angry and have boobs and butt in them. And then there's Bumblebee, which was
You know
just
what?
aimed at
Actually, I'll say
happy
this:
people.
the Michael Bay movies aren't aimed at teens. The Michael Bay movies are aimed at the family unit specifically.
Ah,
They're aimed
but
at two parents who are bringing their screaming kid to a movie, and they need to figure their stuff out and go into a movie. Ain't it? And that's who that is for.
oh dear. Um, but it made me think about like so if you want to talk about the major pieces of again, I'm just using the language here, but I'm not liking it as I'm saying it. Adult orientated media for Transformers. You've got the comics, which very much transitioned into that around phase 2, but I'd say just before as well. You've got Machinima, which was, and they said it was for quote unquote adults for 3 seasons, and
They
then
did.
you did, and then you've got Prime Wars. And of those 3, the only one I think worked was the comics. And in fact, I think what we got from the other 2 was of a noticeably worse quality in terms of character, story, stakes, action. If you want to go very childish, violence, than the vast majority of Transformers shows at, again, supposedly aimed at kids, going well back into the 1990s. So why is it, in your opinion, that these things that were supposed to be, they were the show we were all supposed to have been asking for? It's the show that the people who don't want Prime's mouth have been begging for. It's the people who have been trying to find the grown up piece of media they've always wanted. They had it. They were given it, and they were shit. At least one was shit, and one was, in my opinion, wasn't very good. Why do you think they couldn't get the formula right for them in comparison to Cyberverse or Earthspark or Prime or Animated or something like that?
I have a tremendously mean answer, and I actually feel bad about it.
Do it.
Well, I think it's less about them being for adults because I've seen the posit that this proves that Transformers animation for an older audience just won't work, and I disagree with that.
I strongly disagree with that.
Yeah, those 6 series, right, the animated series that were aimed at an older audience, all had the same showrunner. So I think it's less of an indictment of Transformers operating in an older audience. I like to call it older audience theme. It feels less like I'm about to say kidult. But they all had the same showrunner dude. I think that their overall quality is mostly an indictment of that showrunner. More so than an indictment of the notion of doing it. And I feel bad saying that because that is being very mean to one person, basically. And I don't want to be mean when I'm saying it. So I hope it is clear that I'm trying to say it as a piece of feedback and as a simple piece of conjecture. The Machinima trilogy and the Netflix trilogy both had the same dude presenting as showrunner very heavily. And I feel that just meant that his version of Transformers is kind of needs another person having input on what's going on more so than what actually happened, is how I'd put it. Because those 6 series, I would categorize the most as having a very adolescent idea of what maturity is, if that makes any sense. Thinking that the maturity and stakes is speaking slowly and solemnly, and sometimes people die, and that's about it, right? And so I think that's why they didn't work. Basically, I think that they had a very 1994 teenager version of. It was like a 1994 teenager was allowed to make a show in 2020, basically. Or 2020, and the intervening decades never happened to them, right? And I think it will greatly inform another attempt in future. I hope, right? That and I hope that the comic books, which demonstrably were of a level of quality that hang in what you could call something that is made for a mature audience to enjoy, that those inform greater another production like that. And I think they already, through some of the screenwriters, informed some of the better stuff that was in the Netflix trilogy. But it was that's like it's a whole lot of work by someone who can't change the overarching atmosphere. So you get your bits and pieces of goodness, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the why, I would say.
This might be a better example. If we actually, just for something like this. G.I. Joe, was it Resolute?
I always mix it up. There's
the animated shorts, and then there's the one that was on the hub.
Yeah. Resolute was the Warren Ellis one.
Oh, so that's the one that was on YouTube.
That's the Resolute was the one that was the darkest G.I. Joe cartoon.
Yeah. So when that aired, that approached being for older audiences by basically going like, I think you said it once on an episode, just like, oh, look at all the blood, it's from Major Blood because Major Blood's dead. And that, to me, like, I asked this question: why is it when media wants to be mature and wants to have a big flag in it that says it's mature, it feels the need to have that level of violence or nudity or swearing without? And I say this as his favorite TV show of the last 10 years is Primal, but the violence has no meaning. And when Transformers has really gone into an area where I think it's lost a lot of its soul, it's when violence has no meaning. All Hail Megatron did it a bit. The movies do it a lot.
Constantly, yeah.
Yeah, again, bar one, which I have a horrible feeling is about to be erased from history. But I can never decide if it's because someone saw like Invincible and said, "Oh, I could do that," or said like, "Okay, people are watching this because there's blood," or something like that. And with Transformers specifically, like because I feel the animated series that we get in general, the ones that are good, do really a good job of having good action scenes and having, within the context, extreme violence because you can dismember them because they're robots. With such good character development, good animation, stuff like that. This transitioning in what if I'm getting away from myself a little bit, but one, why do you think it is so hard to separate non-comedic, non-gross out humor, adult-orientated animation, which is a sentence I never hope to say again, from gross out violence, and why? What do if they do a mature, no, again, bad phrasing, older audience aimed Transformer show, what can they actually do to make it an older audience experience?
Yeah, just on the violence thing, like I have always felt that it's basically because a lot of the current creatives and showrunners are of an age where they grew up with the harshest, most shocking adult animation being like heavy metal and anime.
Mm.
And I think that a lot of that notion, and then you go into things like Cyber 6 is actually pointedly not violent. Um, Aeon Flux, um, and stuff like that. You know, like violence was in the 80s and 90s. Violence in animation was absolutely shocking, and it meant it was for an older kid, or like an adult. And I think a lot of that still carries over to this day with, like, again, a lot of stuff where the notion of what mature content means is very adolescent. And
Mm.
just to like you said, you also you're like, I like Primal. Like, yeah, I think Primal's cool. I liked, for the most part, I like the last season of Samurai Jack. I like Aeon Flux.
That's a very good one.
I'm yeah, I'm a fan of Aeon Flux. There's all kinds of, like, I liked the HBO Spawn cartoon a lot, and
Mm,
that was
mm, mm,
entirely built on the back of, like, we're gonna have blood and boob in it. Um, that was just not really the most important part to me. There was other
mm.
stuff going on I liked. Uh, so I think it's just it's again it's the leftovers and the detritus of the 80s 90s culture that a lot of current adult creatives, who are by that I mean they are themselves adults, still can linger in the back of some heads as, like, this is how we will show that it's for mature audiences. And for the most part, especially with violence, I'm like, I actually don't mind overblown violence that much, because maybe I'm just a damaged person, but, like, I mostly mind it when I feel like it is accomplishing nothing. Like in the live action Transformers movies, my biggest beef with the violence in it is just that it serves to render the characters as props, even in their own deaths. There's no character dying anymore. There is a large effect piece being torn apart in front of me, and I no longer see it as a speaking living character. Um, and so I think what Transformers, I think, actually could make use of greater levels of violence, but it has to be wielded with a scalpel.
Mm.
I will always go to our little boy, our lad, our child, our nephew, our favorite, our golden little bundle, Nick Roche, as someone who knows how to wield that scalpel
Mm.
uh, very well. Like, I would always trust if Nick Roche says, like, "Hey, I'm going to do a kind of violent thing in my comic," I'd be like, you know what? You're going to do it for a good reason. It might be a bit much, but you know, I'm easily bribed by your pleasant grin, so I will trust you.
It is very pleasant.
Uh,
I don't like it in
it's very.
person.
I
Manipulative.
have been. I'll only tangent for a sentence. I have been enjoying Nick Roche specifically laying into whoever it is that was
Zavi.
not Zavi.
Oh, fucking Zavi.
I was retweeting every single one of those because I was like, you know what? I'm as someone who does not like the notion of someone wielding clout, Nick Roche is allowed to do that for Transformers toys that you didn't get to him. So yes, I am going to retweet all of this. Eat it.
Talk about
Uh,
wielding it like a bloody scalpel. Oh my god.
yeah.
He was
Uh,
precision. There were precision strikes.
Because yeah, also I retweeted it because a lot of his tweets were good.
Mm.
He was laying in good shots.
And I
But
can
yeah,
actually I nearly got the Super 7 Ultimate turn off Zavi, and then it suddenly disappeared. And I nearly got a bunch of Jurassic Park stuff off of them, and they
oof.
suddenly disappeared. And now I'm never going to try and buy anything pre-order off them again.
Hey, you know, sometimes distribution companies forget that they're supposed to actually order products. You know, they're
Hmm.
humans.
Hmm.
But yeah. So what I mean is like I don't think that hyper violence has no place in Transformers for older audiences. It just has to have a good place. It has
Hmm.
to be wielded well. With Transformers, it has to be done in a way that is really like intense, I think, and that intensity has to be informing something narrative.
Hmm.
Um, Easy example being, if you're gonna do it, it's got to be something like cutting someone in half up the middle with a chainsaw. Not literally that storytelling point, but I'm like, that is what it would probably have to be if it's going to be something you're leaning into,
You need to
and
see the face split kind of thing.
you've got to build the story around it as well. You cannot just do it because you're allowed to, because I think most viewers will see right through that. The Machinima series, I think, tried to do stuff like that now and then under the limitations of their animation budget.
I would
Which
say season 3 of that tried it the most.
Yeah, I always remember that clip of Victorion's head falling off. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm like, this isn't shocking though, because like this is informing nothing, and this is informed by nothing, and you don't have the budget to even make it look gratuitous. It just looks silly and funny.
Did you see what happened to Minosaur?
Well, wasn't Menasor one of the ones where they floated up into heaven, basically?
I basically Overlord just kind of ripped out part of him, and then he floated up into heaven. It was
Yeah,
like,
the part
yeah,
where he floated up into heaven was so funny.
yeah. Oh my
It
god,
was it was right out of Big Man Japan, if you've ever seen that film, Daini Honjin.
yeah.
It's right out of that, and it's like
People say
I was like,
that. Oh my god.
either that's a reference, or you just accidentally rolled a natural 20 in something you weren't trying to do, and it was very funny.
Oh my god. People have been trying to convince me that Machinima got better with time so hard sometimes, and I'm just like, it didn't. It didn't.
No, it didn't. I'll
It did
just,
not. It did
I'll just
objectively not. You could
no.
love it. If you love it, I'm happy for you. But
It got okay. I'll say it got better with time, but not on a gradient where like you would see the line go up from a distance.
it just
Uh,
anytime I think about it, all I picture is Volcanic and Predaking chasing someone with their arms out like a Frankenstein monster.
yeah, yeah. There's also that.
Oh my god, it was
But yeah, I
so
think
bad.
an older audience Transformer show can do is lean in. Like honestly, it just means it would have, I think, more time to lean into what Cybertronians are.
Mm.
Um, and then it would still need to be like also pointedly getting into like, I think you'd be getting into a very character driven piece, because Earthspark is kind of positioning itself to go into the notion of what Cybertronians are by introducing non-Cybertronian Transformers, basically,
Mm.
which is a plot point right out of an older audience Transformers show, in my opinion. So it's like you'd have to, I think, go in wanting to tell a complex story, and not complex it's hard to keep up with, but thematically complex. Something that, like, easy example, the Combaticon story from IDW1.
Mm-mm-mm.
Uh, Mayor Greed Scott's Combaticons would be an older audience Transformers story where you take what we had with them and you blossom it into an actual miniseries. That could be something. You probably would need to make that the B story in another plot with the way that people with money will actually pay for making anything nowadays. But that is an example I think of a story where like you get into the notion of like not just what love is, but you get into the notion of like making a deal with the devil, and then realizing that that was not a good thing to do. But if you do anything to try to change it, everything will not only fall apart, it will fall apart worse, and you will lose everything that you had. That's, in my opinion, from the perspective of Blastoff. Um, and in that story, like that's also a story I always kind of wish would get another go, because it didn't get enough time
Mm.
to become a full circle story, and that's no one's fault, right? But like it does mean that Blastoff, in my opinion, got left as an unfinished character because he committed a horrible atrocity against basically his family.
Yep.
And he was that narratively there was to be a final chapter, in my opinion, to that story in some way.
Mm.
And without that final chapter, it is really tantalizingly left unfinished, because it's like in the meta narrative sense, you can't just leave Blastoff where he is now. He's too interesting, and his motives are too um empathetic on certain levels,
Mm.
that like you can't just leave him. But unfortunately, you have to. Damn,
I think he's
we're
dead.
stuck.
I honestly think he's dead.
I mean, that's the other thing about the Combaticons is like they were so left in a lull, like that you don't even know if they blew up with Cybertron or not. Like in fact, they were. My headcanon is they were in such a meta narrative stasis, they survived the explosion, but they are also still floating there in their cell.
Oh my
Um,
god, that'll be an awkward everything.
uh, but yeah, I think that's kind of what it would be. Is like you'd have room for surgical levels of violence
Mm.
used well, but you'd more so need to be telling a story that is, um, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, you'd be telling a non-toy commercial story, which is
Mm.
hard to say because inherently any story with Transformers is a toy commercial.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
The nature of our fandom and the stuff that goes with it, but
Again,
um
demonstrated by IDW.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But I think that just you would be doing it without thinking about selling any specific characters, having to slot in new characters. You'd be doing it all for the story you want to tell. And I do think, unfortunately, with Transformers, the creatives who have a story like that in mind are few and far between. I should say the creatives who would get to helm a show like that,
Mm.
because a lot of them come in sort of from the outside and are mostly just like, well, I would like to tell a Transformers story where there's stakes and things, and it's like that basically you ideally it would be a showrunner who read all the comics. Like that's, and I don't mean that as like the comics are the be all end all, because I think that is a bit of a crutch that a Transformers fan can fall into now and then.
Yes,
But like it is also an easy place to pluck a creative who might have a really interesting story idea, because
and then
they'll
Hasbro
have been.
slowly slides over and goes, "All Spark, all Spark."
Yeah, and then you go like, hey, you know what? The Allspark exists. It is not part of this story though, so we'll mention it. But because honestly, that is how you can work the Allspark in, is if you have
Mm.
a story to tell, unless it is about the fate of the planet, which is again that's part of what made the Netflix trilogy suffer. I think was that it was the fate of the planet. Uh, is you can just say, yeah, the Allspark's there, over there. We'll see it in one shot. We'll have an Allspark priest. It'll be some guy who's talking about how great it is, but the story's actually about this. The story's actually about Punch Counterpunch trying to solve a murder mystery, and it turns out.
Oh, I have something to tell you after recording. Um, but sorry, I just had an image as well of just like the All Sparks there, and you just cut to the priest. It's fine. Cut back to you. It's just like he does. He's
Yeah.
happy with his work.
Like I mean I'm not gonna get into the weeds. I have so many ideas for Transformers stories that like I feel like are just never gonna happen. That would be so cool.
Mm.
And because I say that, I hope I eat big old entire birds of people actually doing stories. I mean, Nick Roche did one of those in
Mm.
Last Bot Standing. The idea of Transformers who turn to organic sustenance. Um, I always thought of that based on like I thought of that it was slightly a joke, but also slightly not a joke. When I first saw Legion from Kiss Players way back, I was like, you separate out a lot of stuff from this. The idea of Cybertronian life deciding to turn to organic sustenance is kind of freaky, and I
Mm.
like that idea. And then, hey, guess what? Last Spot Standing, spoilers, touches on that idea very heavily. And I was like, hey, Nick Roche, you read my fan fiction. How dare you?
Maybe he read Kiss Players and decided like I want to do this with less tongue.
If that was the route, then Nick Roche needs to hang out with me and be my friend.
He's all right. He's not great. Very Irish.
It's fine. It's fine.
He's all
I've talked
beard
to
now.
Irish people. I've talked to Irish people before. You might not believe me about this, Mikey.
Oh dear. So I think we're coming to a nice point here. If I was to sum up my, I've been thinking about stuff that's been talked. My opinion, as it is now, is that, we would all benefit, I think, by realizing the position we are in, as the very privileged position we are in as collectors and fans, as adults, and also probably accept that we are never going to necessarily get the media we think we deserve, but that does not necessarily mean we are not getting high quality products. And I think whatever the future holds for Transformers, like, I think Earthspark is off to a good start. I'm maybe a 7 out of 10 for it if I was to give a number to it, but I think it's heading in a good direction. And I think just the very idea, like, we've got a Megatron and an Optimus who are human beings again for the first time in so long. And I say that with, like, Cyberverse, and Cyberverse worked very, very hard to make them people by the end of it, but it had to fight like someone in Hasbro. It was an active fist fight. Whereas now we're starting with them as, like, Optimus contracts. Optimus uses contractions and likes emojis.
Yeah.
Megatron.
I was gonna say every Cyberverse writer who happens to be working on Earthspark, I am so happy for them because I feel like it must be a breath of fresh air having, like, production value backing you up. And it's like if I got to assume that it's like, oh, I don't have to get in a fist fight to have Optimus Prime, like, have a character flaw. Like, oh, thank God. Oh, and our action scenes are just gonna look good. We don't have to, like, work. We don't have to push so hard to, like, get an extra budget thing to have, like, a second character model or something. We just got, all right. Oh, we can just have X number of new characters show up at the end of the season and we don't have to pay for ourselves. I'm not saying that's what they had to do with Cyberverse at that point, but you know what I mean, right? Like,
well, meet Cyberverse, who at the very end went, "We are using no new model." Shut up.
Yeah, like I feel so happy for everyone.
And Trypticon Dinobots Volcanicus.
Yeah, like I gotta wonder if Trypticon's model came about because they were like, well, we're already making Volcanicus. We need a Decepticon one to sell a toy, and they're like, yeah, go for it. And then later on, like, oh yeah, we never made a toy. Oh well, whatever.
Yeah, it's like, so,
but yeah, yeah, like Earthspark feels like it is people just, they're not having to fight a system to make a show, and it's been a bit for Transformers. I think not having that vibe.
Yeah, very much so, and I'm enjoying it. I'm looking forward to part 2. I'm just gonna say it out, like, Megatron is my favorite character in the whole thing. I think oh, what's his name? The Hound. What's his name? Robbie something.
And now you said the Hound, I will not remember.
Yeah, but I think he's doing a great job. I do find it mildly hilarious every so often when basically Megatron sounds like he's from Scotland. But
Rory McCann.
Rory McCann, thank you. I think he's done a great job. And I think if there's one thing,
every time he says Dorothy.
Yes, it's good. But actually, I will say, like, we've been very lucky with Megatron voice actors. They've been pretty much universally great. Even in shows that didn't deserve them. But
correct.
You know, bringing in essentially IDW Megatron, but not quite as well, keeping that Decepticon connection, but you know, he's very much reflecting that. I think has added the maturity to the show, that maturity that as a viewer, like, okay, this is something that's worth talking about, like a Megatron who has walked away from the bad guy side, because he doesn't see it that way, obviously, but without also, like, the baggage of people trying to logic how you can do this when 7 billion people have died. Because we don't know how the war could have been, like, 5 minutes beforehand, and he stubbed his toe and said, right, I'm joining Optimus. But I think Earthspark really could like touch on these things. It's okay. So weirdly enough, I think Earthspark is a Transformers show that is being made in the context of the 2020s. Cyberverse was a Transformers show that was being made in context of the 10-minute medium that the writers then came along and said, no, this is going to be good. This is going to be great, in fact. And we're going to make something brilliant. But Earthspark is being made in the context of shows like Steven Universe, like The Owl House, like Infinity Train. And their approach to storytelling, I think, is very reflective of that. What do you think?
I would agree. Like my actual direct analog would be modern DuckTales.
Oh, it's so good.
Because like modern DuckTales actually is something I should have mentioned earlier on in the
Bomb
show.
gold.
Because again, that show absolutely made for kids. That show also absolutely satisfying to watch as
Yep.
an adult. It was so good. And I think that's also like that. I mean, granted, there are shared voice actors, but like that's also one of the first shows I thought of like, yeah, this is a, like I always was describing Earthspark as like this is just a really good Transformers like for kids show.
Mm.
Uh, and it has a lot of really cool ideas and hooks, and it looks kind of pretty, and it's fun for me to watch. It has some slice of life if you want some slice of life, and then it has a big bombastic mid-season finale if you want to see an animation company actually challenge powerhouse animation studios in the modern action animation realm. uh, I say that as someone who like obviously I didn't see Rise of the TMNT, so I just didn't know. I I wasn't aware. I didn't know that we would get. I always felt like we needed Powerhouse to get access to that kind of stuff. But hey, I'm fine with there being more than one. You know. But yeah, I think it's also touching on a lot of really cool themes that make it the next Transformers show that's going to have. It's going to be discussable for people who want that heavy discussion,
Mm.
especially I think as we continue forward, because I think the slice of life stuff is probably going to taper off. And for whatever reason, slice of life is always an instant critique when a lot of folks tend to start wanting to look at something from the adult perspective. Uh, so it's probably going to dial back. I expect we get some with the fresh cast members, uh, but probably not a ton. I think they probably have an even more bombastic thing that they are going to drop on us at the end of the next batch of episodes.
Mm.
uh, but yeah, as far as this podcast topic and Earthspark, like Earthspark, I think is a great example of how to think about this stuff. Is like you said, thinking about where you are in life is important because yeah, there is always going to be the habit of aiming a lot of energy somewhere, even if you don't necessarily know that you're doing it in the moment.
Mm.
Um, and but I would also say like just consider don't think of things as either kids or adults, and also don't think of there being precisely one middle point. It is a long gradient. Uh, I recommend thinking about contexts more than thematic restrictions.
Mm.
And as I put it earlier, it's less about like what they can't do and more about what they would like to do and what they maybe don't have any interest in doing. Um, as the people making a show. Because I think the one thing that we've kind of hit over the course of this discussion is that like what a for older audiences cartoon even is a lot more in the good ones. It is a lot more nuanced than just they can swear and have a boob that squirts blood, right? Like it's a lot more nuanced than that
Mm.
when you get into the better stuff. Because you look at something like as someone who hasn't seen a ton of it, but I've seen a lot of bits and pieces, and I know you love it. Like Primal is, as I've taken Primal so far, it's not about the fact that there's a bunch of blood, man. Uh, like clearly there's more to it because that show has locked in a lot of folks
Mm.
for a lot of seasons, right? So the Gendy being an animation figurehead that also tends to go into projects with more than like a shallow intent like that as well.
Mm.
Um, but it's always going to be more about how do you put this? It's a little bit less about the content, and a little bit more about just freedoms and flexibility. Like I think there's just like older animation means you have a little older audience animation means you have a little bit more flexibility here and there. But like even then, that can be tenuous depending on your showrunner or what the producing side wants the older audience to be receiving. Because like you said, a lot of comedy shows, it almost feels like they have to put in some gross out humor here and there in their opening batch of episodes just to get the money.
Mm.
Like I always think about the first 3 episodes of BoJack Horseman and how they, to me, are so non-indicative of the rest of that entire show that ran for several seasons.
Mm. I'd say Lower
You
Decks is a
start
good
off.
example of that as well.
So I've heard. So I've heard. I
Mm.
have not checked it out myself, but I have heard that like it opens up as like,
Oh,
you
it
know,
opens up as a bad Rick and Morty episode, and it left such a
that's what
bad impression of
that's
me, I didn't come back to it for years.
I was trying to figure out like what adjective to put in front of Rick and Morty to describe how I heard about the first few episodes of it. But yeah, mine, like I've heard from people who stuck with it, and they're like, yeah, it's very suddenly becomes like just very good Star Trek that happens to be animated. And I'm like, that's great. That's it should be. Final Space is another one. I
Mm.
gave up on Final Space 2 episodes in, and then I went back to watch it partly because I felt guilty because I knew someone who had worked on the animated side of it, and then
Oh.
I watched a whole bunch of it, and I was like, no, the show like actually it's at times grating, but like I grit my teeth and go like, but you're doing something cool. And then I looked up and watched a little bit of the creator talking because he was the part that was kind of annoying me early on.
Mm.
And I was like, this is actually just this man's personality. Is he's a very eager, intense, slightly irritating but lovable dude, it seems. And yeah, like Final Space is another one that falls into there. Also, Disenchanted put me off 2 episodes in. Then I went back
Yeah.
in early lockdown. I went back in and binged it, and I was like, yeah, the first 2 episodes I think were the worst 2 episodes of that entire show.
I
Turns out if
got
I'd
the
watched one more,
I got to like Disenchanted quite a bit after the opening. I only watched it because it was locked down and I was like watching like online with a friend, and
yeah,
they were just like saying, "Listen, just watch this with me. It gets good." And I was just like, "But I watched the first episode and it felt so hard, try hard nonsense."
yeah, I've tried 2 episodes in 2019, and I was like, no, I just don't feel this. And then it
Mm,
just happens sometimes, and I
mm,
feel like with older animation, it's there's nothing to back this up. It's just a feeling. I feel like they have to lean into that more grating Rick and Morty gross out stuff like early on to get their money to make something better.
mm.
Um,
I think
and
there is a very big part of that because I don't remember who said it in an interview, but they were saying that yeah, uh, adult and older animation is seen as it is Family Guy, Simpsons, Rick and Morty. You have to be those. If you're not
yeah,
those, you're not worth investing in.
yeah, and that's why I mean the whole state of animation right now is another reason why I try to be very kind to animated productions right now is because that whole industry is just under assault.
Yep.
And it has been for like before the most recent horrible stuff, but like um it's frustrating because you constantly hear stuff like that, and then you look at things like and none of these shows are even what I would call perfect, but you look at things like Castlevania and
Mm.
Arcane and whatnot, and you're like they're actually just doing like a good primetime tier type of show with its pits and falls that is in no way shape or form remotely related to the three pillars, quote unquote, of adult animation, and yet we are where we are, right?
Mm.
Um, it's really frustrating. He-Man, Re- was it Revelations? There's too many R-word He-Man things now
There's
too.
MOTU Revelation Motor. We'll say
The
Motor.
Motor, the Kevin Smith one.
Mm.
Leaving out like the astonishingly ugly atmosphere that built up around that show. Like when you
Yeah.
can get away from that, it was like again, it was like this up and down, flawed but fun experience for me that had some real high points and some pits as well. And it was like, yeah, this is just a pretty neat show that is like I felt like it made decent use of its space of getting to do non-toy commercially stuff despite accidentally becoming a toy commercial for the Masterverse line at a certain point.
Mm.
Uh, but like, yeah, that's another one I'd put up there. I feel bad invoking the Motor name because it has that Star Wars grime somehow stuck to it whenever you bring it up. But
Mm.
yeah, there's so many examples of like shows that, and also these are all shows that I think were better than the made for older audiences Transformers shows that we got. Um, that like all should have been the baseline of quality, and they are what I would call the baseline of quality that I would like to see for something aiming at specifically an older audience. Is like is like just do something exciting, right, with what you're doing. Do something exciting. Basically, be a. It's weird to say because I've been harping on the adolescent view of maturity, and I think it's partly because when you get to make something that is not necessarily for kids, you should be joyful in what you're doing,
Mm,
because you simply will have less. You'll have less ceilings hanging over your head. But just be joyful. Don't think about how you will penetrate every one of those ceilings.
mm.
Just be joyful and make a cool thing that you want to make. Um, and wonderful things can happen. Also, if you haven't watched Infinity Train, go watch it. It's very good.
Very
Uh,
good. I watched it last year, and I was just like, oh, it was kind of like the only other time I've had an experience of that was when I came many years later to Over the Garden Wall, and it was just like, oh, that was
hmm,
stunning, and an Infinity Train. Oh my God, you're canceling what? You're
yeah, like yeah, I mean, Infinity Train does have the slight baggage of like this the end of season 3, where people might go like, "Why are you gonna say that was for kids?" And it's like, leave it out for a second and look at the rest of the entire thing that we're talking about.
Mm.
Uh, I made a hand gesture when I did that. But yeah, this is a topic where I'm like, I get really rambly, but like it's something where I wish I was. How do you put this? I wish I was on a wavelength with a lot more people when it came to this stuff, because I feel
Mm,
like with toy collecting, a lot of folks get trapped in a loop of starting to become dissatisfied and never knowing necessarily why they're dissatisfied, and wanting things that won't happen. Like you mentioned it before, it's like, why don't I just get the show I want? And my response is always like, what do you want?
mm,
And a lot of people, broad strokes when I say this, but I think a lot of people don't actually have a good answer, if they have an answer at all, to that
mm.
question. Uh, to which, then as you said, you start thinking like, okay, well, is this maybe occupying a space of energy for you, and it's a sponge and you need it? Like that's fine, but have the self awareness will make you happier. It just bums me out when people are just mad all the time, because I'm like,
Mm.
you should be having fun with this. If you're not having fun with this, you gotta find something else to have fun with. There is so much stuff being made. You you gotta enjoy your hobby time. If Mike, I'm not gonna ask the question, but like if you're gonna record like a very lengthy podcast about how much you hated watching a 10 episode cartoon on Paramount Plus, it's like that's fine, because that's a thing that you needed to do with your friends. But like
Mm.
you could have
I've
spent that
grown
time
out of
like
that.
talking about.
Would be my
That's how
response
I
to that.
feel, I guess. But
I the
my
last
response.
the last time I did
Well,
something like that was Power of the Primes, and War for Cybertron and whatnot. Well, not Power of the Prime, just War for Cybertron, and that was pure obligation. That was me feeling like we're doing a show, we should be doing, and we didn't even bother doing it for the last one because it's
yeah,
just
because
like
like
what was the point anymore? Like I don't like something. Like I make the gag, or I make the thing of just like I don't like Evangelion, and I'm going to complain about it online sometimes. And sometimes I do that just because like I just feel like being cantankerous because I'm an old man. But the amount of real life energy I would ever put into that compared to what I used to put in, like I can't be hateful that like that in real life. I'm not performing in real life. Like I can't
there's
sit there hating something when I could
there
be sitting there like being joyful about something like I like. I could watch Gao Gai Gar again.
yeah, and there's room, like there's because it feels like you kind of have to tick this box. There's always room to have like the comical fun time ripping up a thing you didn't like. 'Cause,
Hmm.
I've done that, and it's like, yeah, it can be a good time. It's just like, but if you're not having fun doing it, if you're actually getting genuinely mad, it's like, for instance, if you were going to record a lengthy podcast where you're just mad about watching 10 episodes of a cartoon on Paramount Plus, like you imagine if you spent that time talking about this better thing that you and your friends watched because none of you liked the thing you felt like you were supposed to talk about. That's always an alternative that I think like doesn't necessarily occur to franchise oriented fan media. Is like, what if you just make a thing about like the other thing you watched instead? Because that's, if you really want to rip into a thing, but you're not even gonna have fun doing it. Is it not a greater burn to say, yeah, I watched that anyway? I want to talk about this other thing. It's like, example, without wanting to raise conversation points. This is just an anecdote.
Hmm.
I came out of Star Wars 9. Uh, Star Wars Emperor Palpatine has sex off screen. He totally did. You can't not prove it. Anyway, he's a cool Cenobite now. Uh, came out of that, and when my group were like, "So, how's that movie?" Within 5 minutes, I'd pivoted the discussion to how much fun I had watching Knives Out, and just talked about Knives Out instead.
Hmm.
Uh, and no one seemed to mind, is how I will put it. And so I was like, because I had recently seen it in that same period of time. It's not like Knives Out is my go-to movie to talk about instead, but like I had just seen another movie I liked more.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Hmm.
so I just pivoted the discussion, and it seemed like no one actually minded. Just we got in our little digs. We all said, "Yeah, Ray," and then like we let's talk about something that's fun.
Yeah, not a bad way to be. Not a bad way to be. But I think we've done nearly 2 hours of this, and I think I think we've hit a lot of that I wanted to hit. Is there anything you'd like to say at the end, and to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, number one, there's more points to be made that like may not have been hit, and this is a very wide topic of discussion
Mm, mm,
that I
mm,
think
mm,
is just as wide as the like the quote unquote collector psychology kind of grand topic. Uh, I think they're very fruitful topics. I think they need to be approached with the goal of constructivity and joy at the end of the
mm,
day. Um, but I think that they are ongoing conversations, and I would greatly encourage anyone listening to try to have those kind of conversations amidst your friends in a fandom. Because how do you put this? We're not saying you have to do it to grow. You have to do it to become mature or something. But like I have seen in more than one person outside of myself and Mikey that like this is an epiphany that can make your hobby more enjoyable again is finding that vibe of like how do I actually enjoy the media, and also how do I step back if I'm not enjoying the media.
mm.
And I think that's important, and to remove that obligation again. Remove it from your toy. Remove obligation from toy collecting. Also, remove obligation from the media you're a fan of, because you don't have to watch everything, and it's fine to not watch everything. Uh, I'm gonna start repeating myself, so I'll kind of cap it there. But like
Yeah.
that's a big one. Is like this is an organic, unfinished conversation that kind of can't ever finish, and it's
Mm, mm, mm.
important. It's important to have it because I don't think it happens enough.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, and I'll second it. I'll especially say like these conversations with groups of friends are super important. The trap we all fall into, none of us are innocent of this, is falling into the trap of trying to start these conversations with strangers who in a medium that does not allow for good discussion and does not allow for the nuance of real discussion. Whether it's Facebook
oh yeah, yeah,
or Twitter or something like that. And by doing so, these conversations quickly turn into arguments. And as you say, one of the
oh
things,
yeah,
like the aim of these conversations is to spark discussion and joy. So always be aware
yeah.
of
And
that element of it. Strangers
I
do
actually
not
have
necessarily see it the same way you
I have an anecdote I can drop. Is that
do.
sometimes I do get frustrated sometimes in various places when folks start talking about something, as an example, like Transformer stuff, and I feel like everyone is just on. It's not like they're wrong, right? But it's
Mm,
more so everyone is coming at this from the wrong angle, or like this is there's like the griping is feeding griping that is all built on the back of something that does not need to be happening right now. And I have kind of tried to teach myself to just like at a certain point it really depends on the location. Like you said, it depends on the medium of conversation. And I've tried to train myself at times to just go like, I don't actually have to respond to any of this. They're having a conversation. Even if I was there at the start, I can just kind of like back off and walk off if no one like actively goes like, "Hey, what do you think?" Uh, and I can just leave it be, and it might work itself out. Because sometimes you just want to, boy, you just go like, "Hey, look, you do, you don't have to actually figure out a dissertation on why you are or are not engaging with the thing. So you could also just say like, "Oh, I'm not interested,"
mm,
and the dissertation is fine. But sometimes you see someone getting into the dissertation, and then they are hurting at a certain point, or they are you can tell it's like it has now become like a very intensive primary focus of their frontal lobe. It's everything that they're tunneling into, and then there are folks who are feeding it and going like, yeah, man, but also this whole thing, and it escalating the negative reasons why, like, blah, 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 and you go like, boy, this, I'm gonna just go over here. I'm gonna crack open a Mint Tin solo game and play it on my desktop right now. But yeah, also an example of how I have been also guilty to this day of like not being. I don't follow my own advice very well, and sometimes I still get frustrated. I'm just like, uh, yeah. I almost went on 3 different tangents after that, so I'll leave it alone.
Well, before he gets on another one, we'll wrap up there. Chris, this has been incredibly enjoyable.
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to come on for these things. I even got boy after the last 3 years, I got more collector psychology in my brain.
Ooh.
Like,
Well, we now have a place to talk about it. So,
yo,
next time, I don't know what the next topic will be. I've got a couple in mind. One might involve Chris down the road. It probably will, because actually now 2 will, because he knows more about them than other people I know. But we will have different people on. Like I said, the show will come out when it comes out. If you want to make any contributions or give opinions or say, hey, I want to come on, it's themoonbase2@gmail.com. Easiest way to contact me. If you want to send us anything else, it's on Twitter, themoonbase2, Facebook, Libsyn, Patreon, and everything else. And if you're on Patreon for $2 a month, it's you get extra shows and you get stuff like this a week early. So you don't have to be sitting around. I ask you this every time, but I'm sure everyone knows it by now. Chris, anything you want to shill or anywhere you want to tell for you?
yeah. Well, nowadays I can say youtube.com/@Vangelus because I got a handle when they launched those.
Have you fixed the
Uh,
one yet?
oh yeah. It's just it's @Vangelus is my handle. Just
You're actually L now. I haven't like logged into like through YouTube in years for you. Have you just gone to descriptions?
you have to still put it the @ in front because it's a
Ah.
handle. But my Vangel one is also, I changed that ages ago to Vangelus Central because
Mm.
the one was very irritating. But now Vangelus Central /Vangelus Central or /@Vangelus on YouTube works. I'm doing my usual things there. Still figuring some stuff out. Doing more streaming lately because I find that I enjoy it and I think I'm good at it. So
Not
that
bad.
might be.
I drop in occasionally.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That might be where a place I kind of pivot to doing a little bit more of the talking about headlines things a little bit more often
Mm.
outside of podcasts. Obviously, like that, it seems like that is just a general motion on YouTube that is working out for lots of folks. So I'd like to try it out, but B, I'd like to try putting my own little spin on it. Also still doing whenever we can the WTF at TFW podcast on tfw2005.com. We have several episodes recorded. They're just in the editing mill with our volunteer editor, and in that sense, I never like to be pushy about the editing still because I used to do it for a decade plus, and
Mm.
so I feel I come from a place of empathy on that.
I am looking forward to the
Also,
one where TJ talks about Unicron.
that hasn't been recorded yet. We haven't recorded one since he
That's
got it.
nuts, by the way. That's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, I'm kind of happy in part because now I can like have one more person to talk to about the weird nuanced opinions I have about the weird nuances of Unicron's hand feel. Uh, it's a I'll always say about Haslife Unicron, fascinating piece. Everyone should get to see one once, and I think for 90% of people, seeing one and not even touching it will satisfy them.
Mm.
But anyway, yeah, it's that. Also, Instagram /Vangelus Central. I'm on Mastodon. I'm on Hive. No one else is, but uh, I'm on Twitter. I'm also technically on co-host, but I gave up because literally negative people were on negative number people were on co-host.
Oh.
Uh, Twitter still exists currently on January 14th, 2023, so I am there. Hit me up. I got my Tumblr going again in light of Twitter going all bonkers bad. So if you send me Tumblr questions on vangeluscentral.tumblr.com, the Vangeler, I try to answer questions there. That's them all so far, I think.
Excellent. So, guys, thank you all for listening. We will talk to you down the road. And yeah, hopefully this show will have a name by the time it comes out. Bye.